Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Craig. So I will share my screen and put my slides. And thank you, Manoj, for inviting me to be part of this great colloquium. So my name is Serge Stinckwich. I'm the head of research at United Nations University Institute in Macau, and I'm also a computer scientist. And before joining UNU, I was working, in fact, in Cameroon, in Central Africa for 2 years and a half. And I was working with local universities on AI applications. So today I want to share some of my thoughts and the thoughts of the work of UNU about the impact of AI on sustainable development goals. And especially I will talk mostly about the impact of large language model. And as Bruce already mentioned, and because most of my talk will be about the negative impact, I'm also, and maybe this is difficult to understand, we will see after my presentation, but I'm also an AI enthusiast and an AI optimist. So, so I will maybe start with the first slide, so about the 17 sustainable development goals that I guess you all know that are part of the 2030 UN agenda. And in my research institute, in fact, in Macau, we are working mostly on the impact, so the negative and positive impact of digital technologies and AI on these SDGs. And today I want to discuss some of them and mostly the impact about all these large language models on the society, on the world, in the large. So, and hopefully, in fact, I was after John's presentation because I don't have to spend too much time on what is a language model and what is a large language model. So maybe I can briefly remind you that these large language models are not about facts, but words. So the main task is to predict the most probable word following a series of words based on them. And they are very good, in fact, when you are doing linguistics tasks. So every time you need to do auto-completion, machine translations, when you want to summarize a text, they're very good to do that. So for example, if you had this sentence, there might be different possibility to complete this sentence, and based on the large corpus that they are using, these kind of models can put some numbers, and you can build sentences like that with this kind of approach. So it's a purely a probabilistic model. So what are the risks of these kind of models and ChatGPT? So I will try to explain some of them. So I guess the first one is maybe the one that this kind of tools might pose a potential risk on some kind of jobs, especially creative jobs, like people who are doing like knowledge workers, for example. So, and maybe you have heard about this image generative AI system like Midjourney, and I guess for this kind of people who are using this, who are creating this kind of image, this kind of system might pose a problem in the long term. And even for journalists, software developers, and even maybe for academics people, it's also something concerning. Academia, so it's also maybe it's very interesting because without any domain expertise, you can start to write some scientific papers, and this might raise some questions about the future of research production. And but at the same time, there are still a number of issues, because if you have used ChatGPT, for example, and try to produce some references with ChatGPT, most of them are fake. In fact, it's completely it's like hallucinations. In fact, so it doesn't work that well for that. Education, I guess we will spoke more during the discussion about that. It's very concerning also. ChatGPT is already used by some students to write essays, and some universities try to block the access to ChatGPT, but I think this is not a good solution, because we have to accept these tools. And I guess we will have to do the same story that we have before with Wikipedia. We have to maybe try to teach and educate the students about how to use these kind of tools, what are the benefits, what are the limits. So I think we have to play here the role of teachers with students, and not try to completely eliminate these kind of tools in the education. So now I will focus more on three specific risks linked to large language models: so social cohesion, environmental impacts, and transparency. And for the first one, about disinformation and social cohesion, so I took one example, and because I'm located in China, in Macau, so I took this nice example that, in fact, this is the first incident report about ChatGPT, and this incident is inside one repository database that is very interesting. In fact, you can have a look later to this public database. This database is about AI algorithm and automation incidents and controversies. And in February 2023, there was a report that one resident from a city in China, Guangzhou, used ChatGPT to generate and announce that the city government have lifted the number plates driving restrictions starting from March 1st. So it's something that becomes viral on the Chinese social platforms. And normally, in fact, ChatGPT is not supposed to be usable in China, because normally this is banned in China. So I don't know exactly. I guess this guy used a VPN to have access to this to ChatGPT. But you see that this is. And for this example, it's not really harmful, but we can imagine that in the future, more and more, you will see more and more examples of using ChatGPT to produce fake news and disinformation. So this is something very concerning in the long term. Briefly, another example of the risk that and the impact of the large language models is on the environment. So it's very difficult to measure exactly how much these models produce, what are the production in terms of greenhouse gas emission of these models, because most of them are designed and owned by tech companies. But there are some, we can find some insight and some information about these models, and can try to make some prediction about their emissions. So I took a few examples here. This is one of the first large language models produced by Google in 2019. So BERT, and it's already a large model from that time. It's more than 300 million parameters. It has been trained on the GPU, and the training is roughly equivalent to a Trans-American flight. Another example, the Bloom, is something very interesting, because this is an open source large language model produced by people in France and trained in a large computer in France, produced by the company Hugging Face in 2022. And these models, for training this model, they use something like 25 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. So it's roughly equivalent to something like 30 flights between London and New York. And in fact, it's not that much, because they train it in France, and maybe you know that in France we have lots of nuclear plants, so it's not producing that much emissions at the end. And finally, GPT-3, so there's not that much information about this one, so it's some people try to estimate, and apparently for the training, you produce something like 500 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. So you see that it's much more heavy in terms of emissions. So it's correspond to 600 flights between London and New York. So you see that these models, this is just the beginning of the use and the training of this model. So we can expect that there will be thousands and thousands of these models used in the future, and this might they might have lots of impact on the environment also. But there are also lots of ongoing research to reduce the size and the economic cost of this model, because they produce a lot of emissions, but at the same time, they are very also costly. So it's I guess the companies, the tech companies, they will try to reduce this cost in the long term. Finally, another risk about transparency. You know that in fact most of the large language models like GPT-3 are trained on words, the billions of words that are scrapped from the internet. And since there are lots of toxicity and bias on the internet. So you have to purge the data, you have to curate the data, to train the data. And the humans are important in that perspective. So one solution to do that is to try to train an AI on label text, on label examples. So you try to remove everything related to hate, violence, etc., sexual abuse. So you try to remove this by training your system, try to find some labels, examples. And recently some journalists discovered that, in fact, OpenAI used to, in order to get these labels, they use a company located in Kenya called Sama, and they use thousands of snippets of text. And employees of these companies, they have the task to read and label something like between 150 and 250 text per shift, so 9-hour shift. And these employees have lots of mental issues because frankly, there was not that much counseling and counselor to help them because they were exposed to lots of hate and racism and sexual contents, etc. And so it was quite traumatic for them. And so it was not, in fact, OpenAI didn't discuss too much about that. So it was discovered by this journalist at the end. And finally, it was so traumatic for the employees that Sama canceled all his work for OpenAI a few months after, earlier than planned. So you see that this is also an important issue related to the lack of transparency of this kind of system. Because if you want to secure these systems, if you want to remove the toxicity of the system, you need to have the kind of human in the loop in order to remove as much as possible these bad things. Finally, my last slide. So I just want to highlight. One work inside my institute. So we are trying to understand all these risks and the impact of all these risks on SDGs, and we try to try to mitigate this risk. And we recently released one report. It's about gender-sensitive AI policies. You know that AI and probably large language models have lots of bias regarding women. And so we have conducted research in 5 different countries in Southeast Asia in order to understand what are the AI landscape of these countries, and what are the impact of AI, especially on women. So thank you for your attention, and back to you, Craig, thank you.